So in this video, I want to clarify one issue regarding the Atlanta Fed and whether it is um, signaling or predicting a recession, which would be uh, essentially 2 quarters of negative annualized GDP growth, real GDP growth. So the bottom line is that the Atlanta Fed is not exactly doing that, but when you look at the more official measures of real GDP growth, you find that considering what the Atlanta Fed is predicting through its GDP nowcasting system, it looks like we're going to have another negative annual uh, real GDP growth. So let's go to the official one. So the more official one, that is the source here is the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. This is a graph from the St. Louis Fed or St. Louis Fed. That's called the FRED. This is one of the main sources of economic data that we have for the United States and many other countries. And what happened here? So, first of all, for you to get this graph, you have to choose real gross domestic product and then this option here, percent change from preceding period, seasonally adjusted annual rate, which is the graph that is the closest analog to the GDP now published by the Atlanta Fed, with data published by the Atlanta Fed. So let's see what happened. So what happened was that for Q1 of 2022, the annualized quarterly uh, growth in GDP compared to the previous quarter and uh, corrected for inflation, that's what means real gross domestic product, was minus 0.15%. I'm sorry, minus 1.5%. So minus 1.5%. So this is in the past already. Today is 23rd of June, so this was for the quarter. Now you may wonder why this complication of annualizing the the quarterly growth rate. Well, the reason this is done is that so first of all, what does this mean to have an annual growth rate? This is the growth rate. This minus 1.5% in the first quarter of 2021 is the rate that, if expanded to the entire year, would lead to a minus 1.5% annual growth for the GDP for the United States, real GDP. And you may say, but what is the point of that? Well, the point of that is that you can then compare this number here with numbers for previous quarters because not all quarters are the same. Uh, some quarters are longer than others due to seasonality. Some quarters are they tend to see more economic activity than others. So this is why it's a seasonally adjusted annual rate. And again, some quarters are longer than others. Have more days than others. The same is true for months. There are some months that are longer than others. And this is why we do this annualized rate of growth. This essentially makes the quarters comparable with one another. So, going back to what we got, so this is the official measure of GDP growth. It was negative for the first quarter of 2022. Now, if you go to the GDP now, which is also available under Fed economic data, and it's published by, or the source is the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, the Atlanta Fed. We see that the equivalent GDP growth rate for that the first quarter of 2022, is 0.37%. So it's not negative. Uh, and the next one is 0.0273%. So it's lower. Okay, it's lower than the one for the first quarter. So the predicted GDP growth rate for the second quarter of 2022 is close to zero, and it's lower than the previous one, which was not as close to zero. It's 0.37%. This one is 0.02%. So if you compare this number with that minus 0.15, you can see that a predicted lower number means that the Atlanta Fed is predicting a GDP growth rate for the second quarter of 2022 that is lower than uh, minus 1.5%, because this number here, is the equivalent to that minus 1.5%. So this is why we it's reasonable to conclude that the nowcasting system by the Atlanta Fed is predicting that we're going to be entering a recession in the second quarter of 2022, or we're going to be in recession, because that would be two negative quarters of two successive quarters of negative GDP growth, according to the official measure. So the Atlanta Fed is not the official measure, but if you compare the numbers that we have here for the Atlanta Fed with the official measure provided by the US Bureau of Economic Analysis, we have to expect that the number for Q2 will be lower than this minus 1.5%, barring any revisions that would place them both above the zero mark, and therefore we would have no recession. And as you can see, well, if we increase the scale here, so if we will get slightly lower print for GDP, this could be a recession that would be relatively mild, more along the lines of what we had here in 2001, 2000, yeah, in 2001, 2000, 2001, the 2000 recession, the year 2000 recession. So it didn't go down as much, um, and that may be what we have here. But it's important to keep in mind that while this was a mild recession in 2000, and a little bit beyond 2000, but the financial markets, they dropped a lot uh, in that period. Particularly technology companies, they lost a lot of value during this recession here. So having a mild recession doesn't mean that the financial markets are not going to suffer. So just to summarize, the Atlanta Fed itself is not signaling a recession. But since the Atlanta Fed is not the official measure of real gross domestic growth, and it seems to be going down, then you would expect the official measure to go down even further from a negative trend for the first quarter of 2022. And this is why today one could say that the Atlanta Fed is signaling or predicting a recession. So this concludes this demo. Thank you for watching.